Welcome, and welcome into the quiet, into the dim hours where the world becomes softer, where even the wind seems to hold its breath. Tonight, I want you to settle down. Let your shoulders fall, let the dark wrap gently around you, because we're about to travel to a lonely place far out on the edge of the North Atlantic, a place ruled by storms, silence, and secrets. This is the story of the Flannan Isle's lighthouse, and the 3 lighthouse keepers who walked into history, and then vanished. Let the room fade, let the light dim, and follow me out to the islands. The Flannan Isles sit off the western coast of Scotland, 7 jagged pieces of rock rising from the black waters of the North Atlantic, uninhabited, unforgiving, whipped by storms so violent that the cliffs ring like metal when the waves strike. For centuries, sailors feared these islands. They called them places closer to God, or closer to something else. And in 1899, a lighthouse was built here, the only man-made structure for miles, a lonely pillar of light against a shifting sea. Inside that lighthouse lived 3 keepers: Thomas Marshall, the youngest, James Ducat, the head keeper, and Donald MacArthur, a seasoned seaman with a temper but a loyal heart. They tended the light, they fought the storms, and they watched the horizon for ships that would never know their names. And one day in December, those 3 men simply disappeared. No bodies, no distress signal, not a single footprint leading away, just silence. Tonight, we're going to walk through that silence, slowly, carefully, and see where it leads. But before we step fully into the lighthouse, there is something else you should know. Something whispered in the harbors and fishing villages long before the 3 keepers ever vanished. In the years leading up to the disappearance, sailors in the North Sea and the waters west of Scotland began reporting something strange. Not a storm, not a shipwreck, but a creature. Some called it a giant squid. Others refused to give it a name at all. A few old fishermen with weathered hands and salt-stung eyes simply muttered the word kraken, as though speaking it too loudly might invite it closer. Boats returned with deep gouges along their hulls, marks that didn't match rocks or coral. A trawler near Lewis lost half its nets in a single pull, as if something vast had risen from below and dragged them into the dark. And one captain swore he saw a long, pale arm sliding across the surface of the water just before dawn, smooth as glass and impossibly large. Official reports dismissed these stories as exaggerations, as fishermen's tales born from drink and long nights at sea. But the rumors continued, and some of them led straight to the Flannan Isles. A few weeks before the keepers vanished, a passing crew claimed they saw something enormous moving beneath the water near the lighthouse. A shifting shadow that kept pace with their vessel before sinking into the blackness without a trace. Another ship reported hearing a deep, resonant sound, like a distant horn underwater, echoing near Eilean Mòr. No one could explain it. No creature known to those waters made a noise like that. The lighthouse stood alone against the sea, but the sea around it was not always alone. And whether these tales were truth, myth, or something in between, they lingered in the minds of sailors long after the men of Flannan Isles were gone. Whatever lived beneath those waters remained unseen, unspoken, and waiting in the cold silence of the deep. Inside the lighthouse, the smell of oil lamps, wet wool drying near the stove, and 3 men trying to keep the dark from swallowing the sea. Thomas Marshall wrote in the logbook, "Severe storm, sea wild, never seen anything like it." Ducat very quiet. MacArthur crying. These entries made no sense. MacArthur, a man known for roughness, crying during a storm. Ducat quiet in a way that concerned his colleagues. And then another entry. Storm continues. Prayers needed. But here's the part that chills historians. No storms were recorded in the area at that time. Not by ships, not by weather stations, not by anyone. The sea was calm. Yet inside that lighthouse, something made 3 grown men afraid. On December 15th, the supply ship Hesperus sailed past the island and noted the lighthouse lamp was dark. Strange, but not alarming. It wouldn't be until December 26th, 11 days later, that the crew of the Hesperus finally landed on the island, climbing the steep iron ladder up the cliffs to see what had happened. What they found was a silence so complete it felt as if the island itself was holding its breath. When the relief crew stepped through the lighthouse door, the first thing they felt was the cold. Deep, unmoving cold. Inside, the clock on the wall had stopped. The kitchen table was set, as if a meal had been abandoned mid-preparation. A chair had toppled over. Coats were missing, oilskins too, but boots and tools remained neatly in place. Nothing was broken. Nothing was stolen. There were no signs of panic, except every bed was empty. Downstairs, the logbook lay open to its final page. A page with no ending. The light had been extinguished. The fire was out. The island was silent. 3 men had vanished from a rock in the middle of the ocean. A place with nowhere to go and nowhere to hide. The crew searched the cliffs. They found twisted railings, bent metal. Ropes snapped like threads, as if a massive wave had slammed into the island with impossible force. But again, no storms were recorded, and a wave big enough to do this would have swallowed the men whole while leaving no trace at all, which was exactly what had happened. But was it the sea or something else? The Northern Lighthouse Board conducted a full investigation. They examined every inch of the island, every tool, every log entry, every rumor whispered by sailors passing through the Hebrides. The official theory was simple. A rogue wave struck the island, and the men, trying to secure equipment on the landing platform, were swept into the ocean. But the theory had problems. Large ones. Why were 3 men outside at the same time? Why did they all leave without proper gear? Why describe a storm that no one else saw? Why was the clock stopped? Why was the table set, untouched? These details opened the door to stranger possibilities. Possibilities that drifted between the sea and the mind, between reason and fear. After the disappearance, sailors avoided the island. Some claimed they heard voices calling from the cliffs. Others swore they saw shadows moving inside the lighthouse windows long after the investigation ended. One relief keeper refused to sleep in the tower. He said he felt someone standing behind him whenever he closed his eyes. Another claimed he heard knocking beneath the floorboards. Slow, deliberate, like someone asking to be let in. And then there were the log entries. The storm that didn't exist. The fear that shouldn't have been there. These stories grew like vines, winding their way into every telling of the tale. Something was wrong on that island. Something people felt but could never name. The truth behind the disappearance of the 3 keepers lies somewhere between the wind and the waves, and maybe beyond both. Some say the island itself swallowed them, that Eilean Mòr isn't just a rock in the Atlantic, but a place where the world feels thin, where the edges blur and things slip through. There were whispers long before the lighthouse was built. Whispers of sudden dread, of voices carried by the wind, of figures on the cliffs that vanished when approached. Men spoke of moments where the air felt heavier, as if something unseen pressed against them. Maybe the keepers didn't flee a storm. Maybe they fled a feeling, a presence, a sound that wasn't the sea. Something that called them outside, drawing them together, against all rules, against all training, into the cold air and the waiting dark. Some imagined them standing at the cliff edge, peering into a fog that wasn't fog, listening to something only they could hear. A pull, a whisper, a shift in the world beneath their feet. And perhaps, on that day in December, the island simply opened its hand and took them. Not lost, not taken, just gone, into whatever quiet place the sea keeps for itself. the lighthouse still stands today, silent, unblinking, its steps worn smooth by men who walked them long ago, and perhaps still do in some forgotten echo. Visitors say the wind sounds different there, as if the island remembers, as if the sea is still whispering the names of the 3 men who vanished into its depths. Thomas Marshall, James Duckard, Donald MacArthur, 3 men who lit the darkness and were taken by it. Maybe they slipped, maybe they drowned, maybe they stepped into something they were never meant to see. Some mysteries stay with the water, carried in the waves, hidden in the fog, waiting for someone willing to listen in the dark. Thank you for listening and for spending these quiet moments here with me. If you enjoyed this tale, a like or a subscription truly helps the channel more than you know. And if you're still awake, tell me where in the world you're listening from. I love seeing how far these stories travel in the dark. Good night, and let the shadows keep watch over you until the next tale.